We live in this world of just incredible abundance, right? More options for everything than we've ever had. But instead of feeling empowered, a lot of the time, we just feel stuck. So let's dig into why that happens. I mean, you know the feeling. You're standing there, faced with this just wall of choices, and your brain kind of short circuits. What should be a super simple decision suddenly becomes this huge, frustrating task. And hey, it's not just you. This is pretty much a feature of modern life.
In this quote from the psychologist Barry Schwartz, man, it just hits the nail on the head. This is the heart of the whole problem we're talking about today, the paradox of choice. We're taught to think more options are always better, but the reality? It's way, way more complicated than that.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll define what this paralysis of choice really is. Then, we'll get into the two main types of decision makers, see which one you are. After that, we'll look at the cool science behind why we sometimes choose nothing at all. And we'll wrap it all up with some real, practical ways to escape this choice trap.
Okay, so let's dive into section 1, the paralysis of choice. This is that exact feeling we were talking about. You're so overwhelmed by all the options that you just end up doing nothing. You scroll through Netflix for an hour and then just give up and go to bed. That's it, right there.
So this whole idea really blew up thanks to Barry Schwartz and his book, The Paradox of Choice. His big argument was that our culture's obsession with freedom and having tons of options, well, it has a dark side. It can actually lead to some serious stuff like anxiety, stress, and even depression. And when this gets really, really extreme, it actually has a clinical name. It's called decisiophobia. And this isn't just, being a little indecisive. We're talking about a genuine, irrational fear of making any decision at all.
Yeah, the symptoms can get pretty severe. We're talking real physical and psychological reactions, like muscle tension, panic attacks, even becoming completely dependent on other people to make choices for you. It can be totally debilitating, and it really stems from this modern problem of just having too much choice.
So, okay, how do we all deal with this flood of choices? Well, a huge part of it comes down to your fundamental mindset. And that brings us to two main types of people when it comes to making decisions. Are you a maximizer or are you a satisficer?
So here's the difference. Maximizers, they're on a quest for the absolute, number one, hands down best. But think about it. With a million options out there, how can you ever really be sure you found it? It's exhausting. Then you have the satisficers. They have a, let's just say, much saner approach. They have their criteria, they know what's good enough, and as soon as they find something that checks those boxes, boom, they're done. They choose it, and they move on with their lives.
Now, it's really important not to mix this up with being a perfectionist. See, a perfectionist might aim for the best, but deep down, they know it's probably an impossible ideal. A maximizer, though, they actually expect to find the perfect option. And that expectation right there is pretty much a recipe for misery.
And this all leads to one massive looming problem: regret. For a maximizer, any choice that isn't absolutely perfect just opens the floodgates to second guessing. You know that voice in your head? Wait, did I miss something better? Should I have done more research? That constant questioning just completely eats away at any happiness you might have gotten from your decision.
All right, let's switch gears a bit because this next part is fascinating. We're going to look at the hard science behind why we put off decisions in the first place. This isn't just a feeling, you guys. There's actually a mathematical model for "I'll decide later."
For the longest time, economists just assumed that the option to pass or do nothing had a set value. But what if that's not right? There's new research that proposes a pretty radical idea. The value of doing nothing actually changes. It becomes more or less appealing depending on how difficult the other choices are.
It's called the decision conflict model, but don't worry, it's way simpler than it sounds. Let's go back to that cereal aisle. Imagine you have 10 boxes of granola, and they all look almost identical. It's super hard to tell them apart, right? Well, that very difficulty makes the option of just walking away and buying no cereal at all seem a whole lot better. That's what they call the similarity-driven deferral effect. And this is where we see this wild roller coaster effect. So if you have two options that are really similar, you're probably going to freeze up. But, and here's the crazy part, if you add a third option that is clearly better than the first two, the decision suddenly becomes super easy. You're way more likely to just pick the best one. So get this, sometimes adding more choice can actually make it easier to decide. Wild, right? And believe me, this has some really serious real-world consequences. I'm talking life and death. Studies have shown that doctors are more likely to recommend no treatment at all when they're faced with two very similar drugs compared to when there's only one obvious drug available. The sheer difficulty of the choice can lead to inaction, even when the stakes are just incredibly high.
Okay, so we've laid out the problem, we've looked at the psychology and the science behind it. The big question now is, how do we fix it? How do we escape this trap? Let's get into some practical, actionable strategies.
All right, here are 5 of the most powerful tools you can use. The number 1, most important thing is to learn to be a satisficer. Aim for good enough, not the absolute best. After that, we've got practicing gratitude, cutting down on daily decisions, quitting the social comparison game, and finally, making your decisions final. No takebacks.
Let's talk about gratitude. It sounds simple, but it's a crazy powerful way to kind of reprogram your brain. When you focus on what you have instead of what you're missing, you shift your whole perspective. You stop that constant, exhausting search for new and improved, and start appreciating all the good stuff that's already in your life.
Okay, here's a life hack that is so simple but so effective. Every day, you only have a certain amount of mental energy for making good decisions, right? So don't waste it on dumb stuff like what to wear or what to eat for lunch. Automate the small stuff. I mean, think about Steve Jobs and his iconic black turtleneck. He did that to save his brainpower for the decisions that actually matter.
You know, a huge piece of this puzzle is just redefining what success even means. That old bumper sticker, "He who dies with the most toys wins," that's not wisdom. It's just a bumper sticker. Real success is about your own internal scorecard. What gives your life meaning? What truly makes you happy? Once you start focusing on that, all the noise from what everyone else is doing just starts to fade away.
And look, the science totally backs this up. Research from Sonia Lubomirsky shows a direct link. The happier a person is, the less time they spend looking over their shoulder to see what others are doing. It's proof that happiness is an inside game, period. So, if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's this. The goal isn't to get rid of choices. It's to be intentional about them. It's about learning to tell the difference between the few decisions that really matter and the countless ones that don't. And then, you pour all your energy into the ones that actually count.
So I want to leave you with a question to chew on. Right now, what's one choice in your life that you are totally overthinking? What's one thing you're agonizing over that might just be solved by aiming for good enough? Just think about it.